I get it. Humanity's reputation across the galaxy is complicated. We're from what's classified as a Class 12 death world, which sounds far more intimidating than it actually is. Sure, our planet has everything from earthquakes to hurricanes, and yeah, we evolved alongside some seriously impressive apex predators. But somewhere along the way, there was this weird disconnect. While aliens respected humans as tough, resilient deathworlders, they somehow got it into their heads that Earth's wildlife was cute and harmless. I mean, have you seen their educational videos about Earth animals? They label squirrels as harmless fuzzy food gatherers and rabbits as peaceful grass nibblers. Don't even get me started on their description of raccoons as gentle night foragers with clean little hands. My name's Cole Davis, and I'm probably going to go down in Galactic University history as the guy who single-handedly shattered that misconception. But, to be fair, Professor Zalix deserves most of the credit. It all started when I transferred to Galactic University for their xenobiology program. Being one of only 12 humans on campus was already an experience, but I was also dealing with some serious space anxiety. Back on Earth, I had an emotional support animal, a ball python named Professor Noodle. He's about 4 feet long, with stunning brown and black patterns, and he's literally the chillest snake you'll ever meet. Most of the time, he's perfectly content to just wrap around my arm and nap. So, I figured why not bring him along? The university had a policy for emotional support animals, and nowhere in the regulations did it specifically exclude reptiles. I mean, they had rules about everything from Xenian acid-secreting comfort slugs to proxims, telepathic floating jellies, but nothing about Earth reptiles. The administrative office was an experience. Picture this. I'm sitting in front of a floating desk watching Dean Vorn. Imagine a cross between a praying mantis and a peacock with bureaucratic tendencies. His head feathers kept shifting colors as he read through my application. Later, I learned this meant he was cycling through confusion, concern, and ultimately resignation. "Mr. Davis," he said, his translator making his voice sound like a GPS in a midlife crisis. "You wish to bring... what was it again? A ball python, sir? A non-venomous constrictor snake about this long." I held my hands about 4 feet apart. His head feathers turned a pale yellow, alien equivalent of raising an eyebrow. "Ah, yes," he said, "one of Earth's ribbon creatures. Harmless plant eaters, correct?" I opened my mouth to correct him, but then thought better of it. Technically, I wasn't lying. Professor Noodle was harmless to people and any alien larger than a rat. Plus, the application form didn't specifically ask about diet preferences. "Yeah, he's completely harmless," I assured him. "Professor Noodle mostly sleeps. Really good with people. Perfect emotional support animal." The dean's feathers shifted to a satisfied blue. "Well, everything seems to be in order. Earth creatures are generally known to be quite docile, unlike you deathworlders." Approval granted. "Though please ensure your Professor Noodle remains in your dormitory or designated emotional support areas." I nodded solemnly, already knowing that the definition of designated emotional support areas was about to get real flexible. See, Professor Noodle had this habit of hiding in my backpack whenever I packed for class. And honestly, the little guy was so quiet and calm that I usually didn't have the heart to take him out. Looking back, I probably should have mentioned that ball pythons are escape artists, that they can fit through holes a quarter of their size, that they're attracted to heat sources, or that they're excellent climbers. But hey, hindsight's 20/20, right? Besides, how was I supposed to know that Professor Noodle would choose the xenobiology lecture on Earth's harmless wildlife to make his grand debut? Or that his perfectly timed escape would cause the greatest panic in Galactic University's 300-year history? Then again, maybe it was fate. Because sometimes it takes a 3-foot ball python named Professor Noodle to teach the galaxy that Earth's harmless wildlife isn't quite what they imagined. And trust me, that's just the beginning. Let me paint you a picture of what Galactic University's xenobiology class looks like. Imagine the most diverse college classroom you can think of, then multiply that by 1,000 and add tentacles. My usual spot was in the back row, next to my lab partner, Gila. Gila was a bioluminescent jellyfish crossed with the personality of a golden retriever, minus the whole floating in water part. Gila was one of the few aliens who didn't treat me like I was going to suddenly snap and start bench-pressing spacecraft. Cole, your internal temperature seems elevated today. Are you experiencing optimal functionality? They would ask, their translucent body pulsing with concerned purple lights. Just caffeine, Gila. Good old Earth coffee. I'd reply, taking another sip from my thermos. This usually triggered a lecture about how introducing stimulants into a deathworlder system was like adding accelerant to a plasma reactor. But Gila meant well. Professor Zalex, our xenobiology teacher, was what you'd get if you crossed a centipede with a corporate middle manager and gave them tenure. They had this habit of using all their arms to gesture simultaneously while lecturing, which made taking notes an interesting challenge. Picture trying to follow 8 laser pointers at once. You get the idea. That particular day, Professor Zalex was extra excited because we were starting the unit on Earth wildlife. The holographic screen behind them displayed what had to be the most inaccurate documentary I'd ever seen about Earth's gentle creatures. They clicked enthusiastically, pointing at a video of a house cat napping in a sunbeam. Here we see one of Earth's most deficient predator species. This one spends upwards of 20 hours in a dormant state. Clearly, a sign of their peaceful nature. I bit my tongue to keep from mentioning that my aunt's cat once took down a drone because it looked at her funny. But they carried on, bringing up a picture of a raccoon. We see the peaceful night forager using its sensitive appendages to clean its food. Such civilized behavior. From my backpack, I felt a familiar stirring. Professor Noodle always got more active when I was trying not to laugh. I reached down to pat the bag, hoping he'd settle. But, most fascinating, Professor Zalex said, pulling up a new image. Next, we have Earth's ribbon creatures, which have evolved to be completely dependent on their plant-based diet. Actually, Professor, I interrupted before I could stop myself. Snakes are carnivores and pretty efficient predators. The entire classroom went silent. About 30 pairs of various eyes turned to stare at me. Mr. Davis, Professor Zalex said, their many limbs rippling in what I recognized as academic disapproval. While I appreciate your unique perspective as a deathworlder, I assure you that our research on Earth fauna is quite thorough. Perhaps you were thinking of a different species. No, I'm pretty sure. I started, but then I felt something that made my blood run cold. My backpack was significantly lighter than it had been a minute ago. I slowly looked down. The small gap in my zipper, which had never been an issue before, was now looking a lot more problematic. I did a quick scan of the floor around my feet. No sign of Professor Noodle. Panic set in. My heart skipped a beat as my eyes scanned the floor under the desk. No slithering shape. No curious flick of a tongue. My hands were shaking slightly, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't freak out. Not yet. Professor Zalex, I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the rising panic. I think my snake just... But before I could finish, there was a soft, rustling noise from the front of the classroom. It was the sound of something very small, very quiet, moving through the scattered debris of alien technology that littered the floor. It was followed by an odd hissing sound. The students froze, eyes locking onto the noise. A few of them shifted nervously. One of the more twitchy aliens, a small quadruped with a shiny carapace and 6 eyes, started muttering in what I assumed was a panic-induced language. Zalex's many limbs froze mid-gesture, their multifaceted eyes flicking back and forth like they couldn't decide whether to lecture, flee, or simply vaporize me for bringing this nightmare into their classroom. Then I saw it. A small brown coil of muscle peeked out from under a desk near the front of the room. It flicked its tongue, tasting the air, and then, like a bolt of lightning, it shot forward, heading straight for the nearest heat source, an alien hybrid tech screen at the front of the room, which was still buzzing with images of Earth's peaceful wildlife. Oh no, I muttered under my breath, backing up from my desk as Professor Noodle, having apparently escaped the confines of my backpack, made a beeline for the glowing surface. The classroom exploded in chaos. There was a strange screech from an insectoid student as it scrambled to its feet, its 4 legs clattering against the floor. Others quickly followed suit, some in shock, others in panic. A few of them had visible shudders run through their bodies, their translation devices trying to process what was happening with some delay. Get it? Get it? One of the students yelled in a language I couldn't understand. Another alien, a tall, snake-like creature with 4 arms, leaped to one side of the room, flailing its arms in a defensive pattern. I'm sure the last thing it expected was an Earth predator scuttling across its feet. "Professor Noodle!" I shouted in desperation, but the snake was already at the screen, coiling its body around the base of the device. I could tell he was trying to make himself comfortable, basking in the warmth like any self-respecting reptile would. "Well, that's certainly an interesting way to engage with the material," Zalek said, their voice dripping with restrained academic shock. "Mr. Davis, would you kindly? Right? I'll get him." I scrambled out of my seat, doing my best to move fast without causing a panic. I reached the desk, but just as I was about to grab the snake, I saw it. The alien who'd previously screamed in panic was now backing up toward me, clearly struggling to maintain composure. Their 6 eyes locked onto Professor Noodle as they hissed under their breath, clearly unsure if they were looking at a predator or just a harmless creature with bad timing. Professor Noodle, on the other hand, was just minding his business. He flicked his tongue again, clearly tasting the air, and then looked at the screen, entranced by the heat. He was oblivious to the chaos he had caused. I reached down and gently scooped him up, but not before the snake hissed, and the entire room seemed to collectively recoil. A shrill noise rang out from the far side of the classroom, where a particularly skittish alien with crystalline skin nearly collapsed from sheer terror. I muttered an apology under my breath as I tucked the ball python back into my bag, trying to calm everyone down. Sorry. He's harmless, really." "Harmless?" Zalek echoed, their many limbs twitching in what I assumed was a mix of amusement and disbelief. "Perhaps you should have mentioned that Earth's harmless wildlife includes something capable of sending an entire classroom into a state of crisis, Mr. Davis." I felt my face flush. "Yeah, well, I didn't expect him to go full chaos mode today." Zalek looked at me, their multifaceted eyes blinking slowly, then turned to the class. "Let's all take a moment to reconsider what we've learned today. Earth's harmless creatures, it seems, may not be as docile as previously believed." A few students were still staring at me, with a mix of awe and suspicion. I could feel the tension thickening in the room. One of the more stoic-looking aliens, a creature with skin like polished obsidian, leaned forward and gave me a sharp look. "Are all of Earth's creatures like that?" they asked, their voice quiet, but carrying an edge of wariness. "Do all of them have surprising tendencies?" I swallowed hard. "Well, not all of them. But, yeah, Earth's wildlife can be unpredictable, especially when it comes to heat-seeking, slithering creatures. And this is your domesticated animal?" The alien pressed, almost like they were testing me. "Yes," I said, feeling my palms sweat. "Professor Noodle's a pretty laid-back guy." "Really? But, yeah, sometimes he forgets his place in the food chain." The room was quiet again, save for the low hum of alien murmurs, as if they were trying to process the implications of what had just happened. Professor Zalek cleared their throat. "Perhaps, Mr. Davis, next time you should leave the dangerous wildlife at home when attending peaceful xenobiology classes." They gave me a wry smile, clearly enjoying the spectacle. I nodded, still feeling my heart hammering in my chest. "Agreed. Next time I'll just bring a house cat." The room erupted into soft laughter, the tension finally starting to break. I exhaled deeply, feeling my shoulders relax for the first time since the chaos started. But as the class slowly calmed down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just introduced the galaxy to a whole new kind of Earth wildlife. And I had a strong suspicion that my fellow students would never look at Earth's harmless creatures the same way again. And as for Professor Noodle, well, he was content, curled up in my backpack, blissfully unaware that he had just rewritten intergalactic zoology in one unassuming, perfectly timed escape. Let's just hope the galaxy's new fear of Earth's creatures doesn't spiral out of control. Otherwise, I might have to start carrying a warning. May contain highly dangerous snake sign. The next few days were interesting, After the Great Snake Panic of Xenobiology 301, I expected to be the subject of gossip, maybe a few snide remarks behind my back. What I didn't expect was for my name to be whispered across the entire campus. Every hallway I walked down, every cafeteria I passed, I could feel eyes on me. And not the curious kind. It was more like they were wondering if I was carrying more harmless earth creatures under my coat. I suppose it was my fault for not warning anyone about Professor Noodle's enthusiastic behavior. But in my defense, I was new to the whole intergalactic university thing. Earth wasn't exactly known for its academic reputation outside of humanity's own little corner of the galaxy, so I didn't anticipate causing an existential crisis for every sentient being within a 100-meter radius just by bringing in a simple emotional support animal. The real trouble started when I noticed the posters. It was my first time walking through the main corridor of Galactic University's central building since the incident. Normally, the walls were lined with serene landscapes of alien worlds, advertisements for upcoming symposia, and images of exotic animals from all across the galaxy. But now, there were posters everywhere, each one showing a different Earth creature with a bold, red-lettered caption, "Don't trust the Earthlings." Under each picture, some featuring squirrels, others depicting rabbits, or even raccoons, was a warning. This creature may appear harmless, but remember, some are dangerous. I stared at the posters in disbelief. Were they seriously running a smear campaign about Earth's animals because of one incident? Before I could process it, a group of students walked by, whispering loudly as they passed. "Did you hear? He's the one who brought the dangerous snake to class. The one that nearly caused a full evacuation. I heard he has more of them. Like lots of them, and they're all really good at escaping. I heard he keeps a giant one in his dorm. It's like 5 feet long. Maybe we should have a no Earth animals policy from now on." I tried to ignore them, but the weight of the whispers pressed down harder with each step. Great, I thought. Now everyone's convinced I'm a one-man wildlife apocalypse. My first stop was the Student Services office. After all, I had to check in with Dean Vorn, and I had a feeling it wasn't going to be a casual chat. His peacock-like head feathers flared as I entered, turning a bright yellow at the sight of me. He'd likely been briefed about the incident by now. "Mr. Davis," he said, his voice sounding like he was trying to keep a neutral tone, though there was an edge to it. "We need to have a discussion about your emotional support animal." "Right, yeah," I said, scratching the back of my neck. I realize now that I should have mentioned that Professor Noodle isn't exactly the best at staying put. Vorn clicked his mandibles together, a sign of frustration, or maybe just the alien equivalent of a sigh. "That is an understatement, Mr. Davis. I have received reports from several students detailing how dangerous your Earth creature was in their presence. A few were almost incapacitated by stress." I winced. I can't believe they're exaggerating like this. I mean, come on. It's just a snake. A small one at that. "You must understand, Mr. Davis," Vorn said, his tone serious. "The way your snake reacted to the room, aggressively seeking out warmth, rapidly moving from person to person, has raised serious concerns. We've already had multiple reports of students with heightened fear responses, panic attacks, and even cases of," he hesitated, as if unsure whether he should continue, "involuntary bodily functions." "Wait, what?" I asked, blinking in confusion. "Mr. Davis, some students voided their bladders in fear of your creature." Vorn was now doing his best to hold it together, but it was clear the situation was spiraling out of control. I bit my lip. "Oh, that's what happened? I really didn't think Professor Noodle's escape would be such a big deal. You have caused a universal disruption, Mr. Davis. It's one thing to bring a creature from a known death world like Earth. It's another thing entirely when that creature causes fear among dozens of sentient species that have never encountered such unpredictable behavior." He paused, clicking his mandibles again. "I'm afraid we're going to have to issue a temporary ban on Earth creatures in certain high-risk areas, starting with all biology and xenobiology classes." A wave of frustration washed over me. Come on, this is ridiculous. You can't ban all Earth animals because of one snake. It's not like I brought a killer whale to class. He's a ball python, for crying out loud. "Mr. Davis," Vorn said, holding up his hands. We are simply reacting to the situation as it unfolds. Perhaps you should consider an alternative approach to your emotional support needs. Something less disruptive. I could feel my blood pressure rising. I can't just get rid of Professor Noodle. He's been with me for years. He's part of my support system. He's not dangerous, and I don't think I should have to give him up just because some aliens got scared. Vorn's head feathers shifted to a solemn blue. It's not about the snake itself, Mr. Davis. It's about what the presence of Earth's wildlife represents to those who've never encountered it. A radical shift in understanding. You've made it clear that Earth's creatures cannot simply be underestimated. I sighed, rubbing my temples. So, what now? Do I just go around with a warning label for my snake? Vorn didn't respond immediately, his eyes flicking over to the paperwork on his desk. Finally, he spoke again, his voice softer. What you've done here, Mr. Davis, is not necessarily a bad thing. You've opened the eyes of the galaxy to what Earth is capable of. But you must realize the consequences of bringing the wild side of Earth into a more regulated environment. I stared at him. You're saying I've started a revolution by bringing a snake to class. Vorn's mandibles twitched in something like amusement. In a way. But I'm afraid this revolution comes with some restrictions. I had a sinking feeling I wasn't going to like those restrictions. But I'd been through worse. After all, it wasn't every day a human managed to scare the entire galaxy with a python. As I walked out of the office, I could feel the weight of my newfound celebrity status pressing down on me. Alien students were giving me wide berth as I passed, their eyes tracking me with a mix of awe and caution. The posters of Earth's harmless creatures were still up, but now the warnings seemed more pointed, like a threat under the guise of concern. It looked like the story of Professor Noodle was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The following week felt like an endless game of dodgeball. Except instead of dodging balls, I was dodging increasingly paranoid aliens. I couldn't make it past a single hallway without feeling like I was about to get a lecture on Earth's dangerous wildlife. Or worse, a stern warning about bringing any more unpredictable creatures to class. It seemed that my ball python, Professor Noodle, had done something no one else had accomplished. He'd ignited a wave of panic across the galaxy. And I wasn't sure if I should be proud or horrified. The ban on Earth creatures in most academic areas was in full effect. That meant no more bringing Professor Noodle to class, no more quiet naps under my desk, and definitely no more surprise introductions to any of my fellow students, which admittedly was probably for the best, especially after the incident. But as the days wore on, I began to notice something even more unsettling. The reactions weren't just limited to my class anymore. People were avoiding me. Alien students would go out of their way to walk around me, like I was carrying a ticking time bomb. The dining hall had a clear "No Earth Creatures" section now, and, just to be safe, the signs had even added the words, including emotional support animals. I was a pariah in my own school, and I had a snake to thank for that. It didn't help that my reputation was growing faster than I could keep up with. Some of the more paranoid students started creating memes, loud, glaring posters that were more like warnings than anything else. I'd walk past one and see a huge picture of a snake, crossed out in red with the words, "Never trust a deathworlder's pet" underneath. One of the posters even had a bounty for my snake. They were offering credits for Professor Noodle's capture. I'm not going to lie, it stung a bit. The whole point of bringing Noodle to Galactic University was for emotional support, not to become the poster child for intergalactic panic. I hadn't signed up for this level of attention, much less the angry stares. But despite it all, there was one place I could go to get away from the chaos. Ziri. Ziri, my lab partner and one of the few aliens who hadn't completely freaked out after the incident, was more than happy to let me hide in the quiet corner of the xenobiology lab. They were the kind of friend who understood when you needed silence and when you just needed to vent about the absurdity of it all. "Jack," Ziri said one afternoon as we worked together on a project, their translucent body glowing a soft purple. "I think the entire campus is afraid of you now. Maybe we should, I don't know, put up a warning sign? Or a firewall around you?" I gave him a tired smile. Yeah, that'd be great. Maybe a perimeter of anti-snake force fields? I think that'll really make me blend in with the rest of the students. Ziri gave a half laugh, the light rippling through their form. At least your pet has earned you some fame. Not everyone can say they've sparked a galactic-wide conversation about Earth's wildlife. You're right, I sighed. At least my life's interesting now. In the worst possible way. We were in the middle of dissecting a piece of alien flora for class when Ziri suddenly stopped, their body pulsing with that worried shade of purple. Jack, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but I've been hearing rumors. Apparently, the Galactic Council is talking about Earth's wildlife now. Great, I muttered, trying not to show the full extent of my concern. What's next? A galaxy-wide embargo on Earth's ecosystem? Ziri hesitated before speaking again. The Council's thinking about classifying Earth as a high-risk zone, and not just for your dangerous animals. They think your planet is too volatile for regular interaction with the galactic community. I blinked. Wait, you mean they're considering isolating Earth? For real? Ziri nodded gravely. That's what I've been hearing. After the snake incident, there's been a growing fear that Earth's unpredictable creatures, and even the environment itself, pose a threat to other species. They don't want to risk sending anyone else to your world without extreme precautions. I'll let that sink in. The idea that Earth, my home, could be treated like some kind of quarantine zone in the galaxy was beyond surreal. Sure, Earth had its dangers, earthquakes, storms, predators, but we were resilient. We'd always managed to adapt. The galaxy, on the other hand, was overreacting to one simple escape attempt by a snake. They can't seriously be considering that, right? I said, trying to laugh it off. Just because of one snake? I mean, I'm sure there are other planets with much worse wildlife than Earth. Ziri didn't laugh. Jack, have you seen the reports? They're talking about isolating all of Earth. No trade, no travel, no galactic relations. Some of the more paranoid species want to eradicate all Earth creatures. Just to be safe. I felt the color drain from my face. Eradicate? I whispered. No way. They can't. Honestly? Ziri interrupted, their voice serious. There are factions within the Council who think any contact with Earth could be dangerous. And they're using you as the example. I stared at my hands, which were suddenly very sweaty. This is my fault, I thought. I didn't mean for this to happen. I just wanted a little comfort from home. Before I could respond, a commotion erupted outside the lab. Ziri and I exchanged a quick glance before bolting toward the door. There was shouting in the hallway, panic in the air. I caught a glimpse of the commotion through the lab's observation window. Several students, including a few familiar faces from my xenobiology class, were backing up rapidly. And right in the middle of them, standing proudly in the doorway of the lab, was Professor Noodle. He was out again. And this time, it wasn't just the xenobiology classroom that was in chaos. The entire corridor seemed to be going into full-blown panic mode. Several students were on the floor, trembling, as others scrambled for the exits. Oh no, I muttered. Not again. Ziri placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, looking slightly worried. You'd better handle this, Jack. You're the only one who can stop it. I didn't have time to think about it. As the situation continued to spiral out of control, I knew there was only one thing I could do. I had to catch Noodle before he caused a full-blown galactic meltdown. Grabbing a nearby blanket, I rushed out of the lab, hoping I could prevent any more intergalactic incidents. But as I stepped into the hall, it hit me. The galaxy was already scared of us. And now, with one more slip-up, we might not be able to fix it. The hallway was chaos. Professor Noodle, looking completely unaware of the havoc he was causing, slithered gracefully down the corridor, weaving between terrified alien students like he owned the place. His glossy scales reflected the overhead lights as he moved with an eerie calmness, entirely unconcerned about the pandemonium he was causing. I, on the other hand, was in full-blown panic mode. Professor Noodle, I called out, trying to stay calm, even as the alien students scattered like roaches in the light. Some were frozen in terror, others frantically typing into their communicators, probably calling for reinforcements, or worse, a planet-wide quarantine. I tried to move toward him, But every time I took a step, the panic in the hallway only escalated. A group of Mivlians, tall, insectoid beings with translucent wings, screeched as they darted past me, their antennae flailing wildly. One of them smacked into a holographic sign, which immediately flickered to life, displaying a warning about the imminent biological hazard in the vicinity. Great. Just what I needed. Jack! Ziri's voice came from behind me, and I turned to see them floating in the doorway, their purple glow a stark contrast to the madness around us. You have to stop him before... I know. I shouted back. I'm trying. Professor Noodle, blissfully unaware of the panic, seemed to be having a good time exploring the hallway, curling around various bits of alien tech, probably seeking out the nearest heat source. In fact, he seemed way more interested in the glowing wall panels than he was in causing chaos. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that my emotional support snake had just made the galaxy's deadliest creatures rethink their views on Earth's wildlife. Okay, I muttered to myself. I can do this. Just keep it cool. He's harmless. It's fine. Ziri hovered over to me, their body pulsing with the same anxious purple light. You know, Jack, they said, trying to sound calm. If you don't catch him soon, we might have an intergalactic incident on our hands. I knew it all too well. With my heart racing, I lunged forward, but just as I reached out to grab Professor Noodle, he slid under the nearest door with a surprising burst of speed, right into the faculty lounge. Oh no! I froze in place for a split second, picturing the aftermath of that. The faculty lounge was full of high-ranking professors from various disciplines, some of whom I had seen on the Galactic Council. If there was any place where this whole situation could go from bad to worse, it was in that lounge. I had to act fast. Ziri, I called, already running toward the door. You go left, I'll go right. We'll corner him. Ziri nodded, their form flickering like a night light, and we both sprinted toward the lounge. I knew it was bad, but there was no turning back now. My snake, my emotionally supportive snake, was about to bring the entire faculty of Galactic University to the edge of an existential crisis. I threw open the door, and sure enough, there was Professor Noodle, basking in the warm glow of the lounge's heating unit like he was on vacation. The professors sitting around the room had frozen, their eyes wide as they stared at the harmless ball python as though it were some kind of ancient predator. One of the professors, a short but stocky Navikian with 6 tentacles, let out a shrill, high-pitched screech. It's a tear! No, another alien, a tall, feathered Xenthian, yelled, standing up so fast that their chair flew across the room. That's the creature. That's what caused the panic across the entire system. My stomach dropped. This was exactly what I had feared. The moment I stepped into the room, every eye in the faculty lounge locked on me, and I could feel the weight of their collective judgment. Mr. Morgan, said Professor Lero, a towering, 4-eyed Zolodrian who specialized in sentient species psychology. They were staring at me, a look of both disbelief and something else in their expression, a mix of concern and something I couldn't quite place. Explain to me why this creature is in the faculty lounge. I cleared my throat, trying to sound calm despite the waves of panic crashing through me. He's not dangerous. He's my emotional support animal. Professor Noodle is harmless. You call that harmless? The Xenthian was still shaking. It looks like a predator. I sighed, stepping closer to Noodle and gently reaching down to pick him up. I promise he's a very friendly snake. He doesn't attack anything bigger than a rat. The professors exchanged looks full of horror, skepticism, and more than a little confusion. Jack, Ziri said from the doorway, her voice tinged with anxiety. I think you might have just made things worse. You're telling me? I muttered, carefully cradling Noodle in my arms. But if they just let me explain? Explain what? Interrupted Professor Lero, their voice stern. The entire campus is in turmoil. The Galactic Council is already considering imposing travel restrictions on Earth because of this incident. And now you've brought this Deathworlder's pet into our sacred space. I could feel my throat tighten. I had known it was bad, but hearing the words travel restrictions hit me like a punch to the gut. Earth my home, was being treated like a danger zone, all because of one misunderstood snake. Ziri hovered closer, their form rippling with nervous energy. Jack, I think we need to, apologize and try to explain this better. This is spiraling out of control. I nodded, feeling the weight of every pair of alien eyes in the room bearing down on me. There was no going back now. You don't understand, I began, trying to find the right words. Earth's wildlife isn't like what you think. Yes, we have apex predators, but that doesn't mean everything on Earth is a threat. There are dangerous creatures, sure, but there are also incredibly peaceful ones. The snakes on Earth, especially ball pythons, are just about as harmless as you can get. The room fell silent. For a long, tense moment, it felt like the entire galaxy was watching me. Then Professor Lero finally spoke again, their voice low and measured. Mr. Morgan, you've made your point. But this incident, this misunderstanding, is not something we can just sweep under the rug. It will have consequences. You have a responsibility to ensure that this pet of yours does not cause further panic. I nodded solemnly. I understand. I'm sorry. I'll make sure this never happens again. But even as I said the words, I knew I had no idea how to fix this. Earth was now a threat in the eyes of the galaxy. And the last thing I wanted was for Professor Noodle to be the spark that set off an intergalactic war. Great. What now? The following days were a blur of diplomatic wrangling, emergency meetings, and alien bureaucrats. The entire campus was on edge, with murmurs of Earth's dangerous wildlife spreading like wildfire. I couldn't go anywhere without being stared at, either out of fear, confusion, or some bizarre mixture of both. My personal inbox was flooded with messages, most of them variations of, "What is wrong with you?" and "Is that a real snake?" Ziri had been doing their best to console me, their pulsing purple glow flickering in anxious bursts, but even they could sense the tension in the air. It was no longer just the students who were terrified. The faculty had become convinced that Earth was teeming with wild, unpredictable creatures, and, for some reason, I was the face of the threat. The worst part? The Galactic Council had started reviewing Earth's status as a Class 12 death world, as though my pet snake was somehow a symbol of everything dangerous about humanity. It was insane, but no one seemed to be backing down, not even Professor Lero, who had been unusually silent after our last encounter in the faculty lounge. I still couldn't shake the feeling that I had made things worse, especially as I walked into my next class with Ziri. The xenobiology lecture hall was colder than usual, less vibrant, less welcoming. I couldn't help but notice the way some of my fellow students, Ziri's glowing kind included, watched me as I took my seat. It was as if they were waiting for the next disaster to happen. Maybe they were right. After all, I had just brought the most misunderstood creature in the galaxy into the middle of their academic lives. "Hey, Jack," Ziri said, breaking my internal panic spiral, their glow soft and concerned. "I've been talking to a few of the students, and well, I think you need to clear the air. Maybe even present something about Earth's wildlife. Give a better picture of what it's really like." I rubbed my forehead. I thought I did that already. I tried to explain, but no one's listening. They all think I'm just some kind of crazy human with a snake obsession. Ziri floated next to me, their glow turning a soothing shade of lavender. "It's not about the snake, Jack. It's about what you represent. You're the first human a lot of these people have ever really met. To them, you're the face of Earth, and the face of death, whether you like it or not." I grimaced. Great. Just what I needed to hear today. Ziri made a soft noise that almost sounded like a laugh. "Look, you know that I'm with you on this. I think you're a good guy. But the idea of Earth has become a bit of a problem. People are scared, Jack. You need to do something big to help them understand that humans are more than just the dangerous creatures they've heard about." "Like what?" I said, leaning back in my seat. "Give a lecture on Earth's harmless species? Show them some cute pictures of rabbits and squirrels?" Ziri's glow brightened. "Exactly. But you need to show them why Earth's creatures can be both dangerous and safe. Why they need to rethink their assumptions." I gave them a doubtful look. You want me to prove that Earth isn't as insane as everyone thinks by lecturing them? Ziri floated up and down, almost like they were nodding. Yes. Start small. You know more about Earth's wildlife than anyone here. If you show them a few examples of Earth's creatures, real examples, they might finally start to see the bigger picture. I sighed, trying to think. All right, but I'm not sure they'll just take my word for it. It's not like they're going to suddenly look at Professor Noodle and think, oh, he's just a little misunderstood. Ziri smiled, or at least I thought they smiled. Their body rippled with warm light. It's worth a shot, don't you think? Before I could respond, the lecture hall door slid open, and Professor Klatt slithered in, their many limbs and centipede-like body wriggling in synchronized motion. They were buzzing with excitement, as usual, their segmented body rippling with barely contained energy. I sighed, mentally preparing myself for whatever strange, inaccurate facts were going to be displayed on the screen behind them. Students, Professor Klatt's many voices reverberated across the hall. Today we begin a special unit, the mystery of Earth's creatures. A fascinating world of paradoxes, predators, and oh, who am I kidding? Terrifying creatures. I'm sure some of you have heard of the recent incident involving Earth's so-called harmless wildlife. But don't worry, I've brought in some top-tier examples for our study. A holographic projection shimmered to life behind them. The first image was a close-up of a massive, predatory creature with glowing eyes and sharp teeth. This, Professor Klatt said dramatically, is Earth's apex predator, the one who rules the food chain. Behold, the great white shark. I felt my throat tighten. This wasn't a bad example, per se. Great white sharks were pretty terrifying, but it wasn't Earth's full picture either. And it definitely wasn't the image I wanted aliens to have of us. Professor Klatt continued with their lecture, showing images of massive spiders, wild dogs, and even images of humans hunting. I sat there feeling more and more sick. This wasn't how I wanted to be represented. There was so much more to Earth than just our death world reputation. By the time the class ended, I was already mentally preparing my own presentation. If no one else was going to set the record straight, then I'd have to do it myself. Ziri's encouragement had been exactly what I needed. It wasn't going to be easy, but I had to try. I couldn't sit back and let Earth's reputation continue to spiral out of control. The next morning, I stood in front of the entire xenobiology class, my palms sweating and my heart racing. Behind me was a large holographic display showcasing various Earth animals, some cute, some dangerous, and some completely misunderstood. A photo of a rabbit flashed first, followed by a picture of a raccoon snatching food from a trash can. Today, I began, trying to steady my voice. I'm here to show you that not all of Earth's wildlife fits into your preconceived ideas. Some of the creatures from my home are far less dangerous than they seem. I clicked a button on my console, and the next image that appeared was a ball python, curled up peacefully on a branch. This, I said, glancing at the class, is Professor Noodle. He's harmless, friendly, and most importantly, he's not going to eat you. I could see a few curious looks, but the room was still tense. It was a start, but the real work had just begun. The silence in the room was palpable. I could hear the faint hum of the air vents and the nervous shifting of feet as the alien students stared at the holographic projection of Professor Noodle. The ball python's peaceful, coiled form, displayed in brilliant detail, seemed so out of place compared to the other, much more intimidating images of Earth's wildlife I'd shown. I stood at the front of the class, trying my best to look calm, even though I was pretty sure my heart was trying to leap out of my chest. Professor Noodle here is a ball python. I continued, pushing past the initial tension. He's non-venomous, and while he's an apex predator in the sense that he hunts small animals, his primary concern is finding a good place to sleep and maybe a warm rock to rest on. Snakes like him are often misunderstood on Earth, just like we are. They're not here to hunt you down or devour your planet. They're just trying to exist in a world full of creatures who have their own ecosystems. I paused, glancing around the room. Some of the students, especially the ones from more predator-prone planets, were still looking at the image with wide eyes, but there was a flicker of curiosity in their gazes. Ziri was sitting in the back of the class, their body glowing faintly in support, and I gave them a small nod, gathering my courage for the next part of my presentation. Look, I said, trying to make it sound less like I was begging and more like I was teaching. Humans and Earth creatures alike don't always fit into neat categories. Sure, we have apex predators, but we also have creatures who live in harmony with each other. You saw the image of the raccoon earlier, right? They're not gentle night foragers as your films might show. Raccoons are opportunistic, yes, but they're survivors. They have learned to adapt in a world where we, as humans, are constantly at the top of the food chain. I click to the next slide. A picture of a squirrel eating from a feeder, looking almost comical with its fluffy tail and twitching nose. And these guys, squirrels, they're a perfect example. They're not harmless food gatherers, as the educational videos would have you believe. Squirrels are a crucial part of Earth's ecosystem, spreading seeds and ensuring that plants grow in new areas. They're not just adorable. They're important. I could see some of the aliens in the room starting to soften, their eyes no longer wide with fear, but with interest. I wasn't expecting a full-on epiphany here, but the fact that they weren't immediately running out of the room was a victory in itself. I get it, I said, pacing slowly in front of the class. Earth's reputation as a death world is overwhelming. We have dangers, sure, but we also have creatures who live in balance with their environment. We live in balance with each other, despite what some may think. We're not all monsters. That's when the door to the lecture hall slid open, and to my horror, Professor Noodle slithered in, completely unaware of the momentous occasion. He had somehow found his way out of my dorm room and made his way to the xenobiology building, all while avoiding any kind of lockdown or security measure that should have stopped him. "Professor Noodle!" I exclaimed, but it was too late. The snake was already moving toward the front of the classroom, his eyes gleaming with curiosity as he neared the projector. His natural instincts had kicked in, and it seemed like he was drawn to the warm light of the holographic display. There was a collective gasp from the students, and just as I feared, the room erupted in a panic once more. "No, please," I began, but it was too late. The students were already scrambling out of their seats, some of them bumping into each other, tripping over the legs of their chairs, and desperately trying to get away from the snake. The Mivlians let out their high-pitched screeches, darting for the exit, while the Zenthians' wings flared in alarm. I saw Ziri's glow flicker bright purple, their expression a mixture of frustration and fear. "Wait! Stop! He's not dangerous!" I shouted, holding up my hands, trying to calm the panic that was spreading. Professor Noodle, completely unfazed, slithered up to the nearest desk, coiling himself around the base of a metal chair as though he were getting comfortable. He was oblivious to the chaos he'd triggered. At that moment, something inside me clicked. I knew I couldn't just talk my way out of this anymore. I needed to prove it. Show them all that Earth's wildlife wasn't just terrifying predators in disguise, and that what they had seen was just an unfortunate misunderstanding. I stepped forward, taking a deep breath. "I know this looks bad," I said firmly, my voice carrying over the room. "But Professor Noodle isn't dangerous. He's curious, yes. He's a snake, and that's what they do. But look at his body language." I pointed to the snake, who was now lazily coiling around the chair, his head resting on the seat, entirely calm. "He's not aggressive. He's simply finding a comfortable spot. I'll prove it." I moved toward Noodle, kneeling down to where he had settled. The students were still staring, some in terror, others in disbelief, but I gently reached out and ran my hand down his smooth, cool scales. I could feel the tension in the room, and somehow the tension in my own shoulders loosen as I gave them a live demonstration. "He's not like the predators you've read about," I said, turning to face the class again. "This snake, this species, is not a monster. He's a part of Earth's ecosystem, just like all of you are part of yours." I stood up, carefully lifting Professor Noodle back into my arms. "We're not perfect. We're not always peaceful. But we, as humans, have learned to coexist with the creatures around us. Just as I hope we can learn to coexist with each other, no matter where we come from." The silence was deafening for a moment longer, but this time, it was different. The panic had shifted, replaced by curiosity. One by one, the students began to calm down. Ziri floated closer, nodding in approval. Professor Klatt, who had been watching quietly from the front, folded their many arms. Mr. Morgan, they said, their voice heavy but not hostile. I think you've made your point. You're right. Not all of Earth's wildlife is the threat it appears to be. The room was still full of nervous energy, but I could feel the shift. There was hope now, even if it was a small flicker. I smiled, feeling the weight of the situation slowly lift. Maybe the galaxy wouldn't see Earth the same way, but for the first time in days, I felt like I was getting through. Thanks for listening, I said, glancing at Ziri, who gave me an encouraging glow. And for once, the aliens didn't look at me or Professor Noodle like we were going to bite their heads off.